So if you want to know your risk for things like Alzheimer's or heart disease or even irritable bowel syndrome, literally decades before they happen.
Right, which is just a wild concept to begin with.
Yeah, totally wild. But the most accurate diagnostic tool isn't necessarily like a functional MRI or some crazy complex blood panel. It's actually sitting right next to your bathroom sink.
Yeah.
I mean, most of us just go about our daily routines, right?
Yeah.
We brush our teeth. Maybe we floss if we have a dental cleaning coming up and we feel guilty.
Yeah, the panic floss.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We view it entirely as cosmetic maintenance. We're just checking a box for basic hygiene to get white teeth, fresh breath, and, avoid the drill.
Right. But based on the clinical data and really the biochemical pathways we were exploring today, that view is catastrophically limited.
It really is. I mean, the mouth isn't really where digestion starts. It is actually where systemic chronic disease often begins.
Because, we have spent the last century in modern medicine basically compartmentalizing the human body. We treat it like a house with all the internal doors totally deadbolted.
Right. Like if your tooth hurts, you go to the dentist.
Exactly. And if you develop a cardiovascular issue, you see the cardiologist. We've treated the oral cavity as this completely isolated room, totally disconnected from the rest of the structure.
Which makes no sense biologically.
None at all. The biological reality is that the oral cavity is the front door to your entire systemic ecosystem.
Wow.
I mean, the state of your gums, the actual composition of your saliva, and the microscopic life thriving on your teeth, they provide a real-time, highly accurate mirror reflecting your total inflammatory load.
And that is really the core mission for this deep dive. We are going to explore how your oral microbiome acts as a primary predictor for chronic disease and, ultimately, your overall lifespan.
Yeah, it's huge.
The framework for this conversation comes from a really brilliant synthesis of research compiled by human biologist Gary Brecka. This was featured on the Ultimate Human platform.
And he really pulled together some amazing insights across cardiology, neurology, and even evolutionary biology.
Yeah, he completely reframes what oral health actually means. Because to get from a basic morning brushing routine to, predicting cardiovascular events, we have to move entirely past the concept of simple hygiene.
Okay, let's unpack this because we have to look at the sheer scale of the microscopic world we were dealing with here.
Right, we aren't just looking at inert enamel and gum tissue. We are looking at a bustling, highly competitive metropolis of microbes.
And the scale is what usually catches people off guard. I mean, when we map the human oral microbiome, we are looking at an ecosystem hosting over 700 distinct species of bacteria.
Wait, 700 species, not just 700 bacteria, but different species.
Yeah, 700 different species. And each of these species has its own unique metabolic byproducts, its own preferred environment, and its own specific way of interacting with your immune system.
That is just insane to think about.
It really is. They form these incredibly complex structures called biofilms. And within these biofilms, different species actually communicate with one another.
Wait, they talk to each other?
Basically, yeah. They use chemical signals in a process called quorum sensing. They share resources, they protect each other from threats, and they just aggressively compete for territory on your teeth and your mucosal surfaces.
I always think of it like a highly dense ancient rainforest. You have this massive variety of flora and fauna, predators and prey, all keeping the ecosystem in a state of dynamic equilibrium.
That's a perfect analogy.
But our modern consumer approach to this rainforest is to just, nuke it.
Literally, we wake up and we use these incredibly harsh, alcohol-based antimicrobial mouthwashes that are explicitly designed to kill 99.9% of all germs.
Right, we are actively trying to render our mouths sterile. But the research Gary Brecka highlights shows that sterility is not just impossible, it's biologically dangerous.
Yeah, chasing a sterile mouth is a fool's errand. It invariably leads to pathology. A healthy human host actually requires a diverse, deeply integrated community of microbes.
Because they begin the digestive process, right?
They do, and they act as a vital first line of immune defense against foreign pathogens. When you introduce broad-spectrum antimicrobial agents or, when you subject that ecosystem to a constant influx of refined sugars, you aren't just killing off the bad bacteria.
You're decimating the good guys, too.
Exactly. You are wiping out the beneficial commensal bacteria that actually keep the pathogenic strains in check. And when the environmental pressure shifts, the opportunistic, harmful bacteria just take over.
Because they reproduce faster, right?
Yeah, they reproduce much faster, and they absolutely thrive in acidic, oxygen-deprived environments. So they just dominate. This localized ecological collapse is what we call oral dysbiosis.
Okay, so let's look at the mechanics of this dysbiosis. When that balance tips and the harmful strains outnumber the beneficial ones, what is actually happening at a chemical level in the mouth?
Well, the shift is primarily metabolic. Beneficial bacteria tend to process carbohydrates in a way that remains relatively neutral to our tissues.
Okay.
But pathogenic bacteria, particularly the anaerobic strains that hide deep down in the crevices of the teeth and gums, they process sugars and proteins by fermenting them.
And fermentation produces acid.
Highly acidic byproducts, primarily lactic acid, which rapidly drops the pH of the entire mouth. And simultaneously, as they break down proteins, they release these volatile sulfur compounds.
Which is the exact chemical mechanism behind morning breath.
Exactly.
I mean, we treat bad breath like it's just a social inconvenience, right? Like
Yeah.
a reason to pop a mint before a meeting and just move on.
What's fascinating here is that understanding this biochemistry, that specific smell isn't just an annoyance, it is a real-time metabolic readout.
It's a distress signal.
Yeah, it's a distress signal from the rainforest indicating that the local environment has become toxic and the anaerobic bacteria are currently dominating the ecosystem.
So it's a clear biomarker of dysbiosis for you at home. And the immediate localized consequences of this acidic, sulfur-rich environment are like the classic dental issues we all know.
Right, the acid begins to demineralize the enamel. It literally strips away the calcium and phosphate ions, which is what physically creates cavities.
And then the bacterial load triggers the immune system, leading to localized inflammation in the gum tissue, right?
Yeah.
Gingivitis.
Yeah, the gums become red, they get swollen, and they become highly sensitive to pressure.
And I feel like most people notice that sensitivity. They maybe see a little pink in the sink when they brush, and they just write it off as a temporary issue.
Oh, completely. They assume they just brushed a little too hard or something.
Right. But the critical pivot in this entire discussion is how this localized dysbiosis refuses to stay confined to the mouth.
It absolutely refuses. It doesn't just sit there politely degrading your enamel. It actively hunts for systemic entry.
Okay, so how does it actually get to the rest of the body? I mean, this is where we bridge the gap between dentistry and internal medicine.
Yeah, to understand how a localized infection in the mouth threatens the heart or the brain, we really have to examine the architecture of the gums.
The border wall.
Exactly. The periodontium, which is the specialized tissues that both surround and support the teeth, acts as the physical border wall between the outside world and your internal circulatory system.
But it's a pretty fragile wall, isn't it?
Extremely. The junctional epithelium, which is the tissue that actually attaches the gum to the tooth, is remarkably thin. I'm talking only a few cell layers thick.
Wow. So when you have chronic oral inflammation, your immune system is essentially rushing troops to that thin border wall to fight off this massive overgrowth of pathogenic bacteria.
Right, creating a state of chronic low-grade warfare right at the border.
And the collateral damage of that immune response is that the wall itself begins to break down. The tissue becomes ulcerated, highly porous, and just structurally compromised.
And the breakdown of that epithelial barrier is the definitive turning point in systemic disease. When those gums bleed during brushing or flossing, it is not merely blood escaping the vascular system.
It's bidirectional.
Yes, it is a bidirectional breach. The physical rupture allows those pathogenic bacteria, along with all their highly inflammatory metabolic byproducts and endotoxins, to just slip right past the immune defenses and enter the bloodstream directly.
So wait, the bacteria just swim from your gums to your heart?
Pretty much the medical term for this is bacteremia, which just means the presence of bacteria in the blood.
That is terrifying. Once they bypass the border wall and enter the vascular highway, they basically have unfettered access to every single organ in your body.
They absolutely do. And this isn't just some theoretical pathway. If we look at the data, like the studies published in the Journal of the Indian Society of Periodontology, the clinical correlations are staggering.
Yeah, I was reading that. They directly link poor oral hygiene and periodontitis to a massive increase in the risk for inflammatory bowel disease, neurodegenerative decline, and severe cardiovascular disease.
The cardiovascular link is perhaps the most heavily documented and honestly the most concerning.
Because of the inflammation?
Yes. When oral bacteria enter the bloodstream, they don't just float passively. They are recognized by your systemic immune system as hostile invaders.
So the body freaks out.
Completely. It triggers a massive systemic inflammatory cascade. The liver kicks into gear and begins pumping out acute phase proteins like C-reactive protein or CRP.
And this systemic inflammation fundamentally alters how your blood vessels actually function.
Right.
I was reviewing the NIH data on this specific mechanism, and what really struck me wasn't just the presence of the bacteria, it was how the resulting inflammation physically alters the mechanics of your arteries.
Yeah, it causes what researchers call endothelial dysfunction.
Right. The inner lining of the blood vessels essentially loses its smooth, protective quality. It becomes sticky. It's like scratching the Teflon coating off a nonstick pan.
That's a great way to visualize it. And that endothelial dysfunction is the precise catalyst for atherosclerosis.
Meaning the buildup of plaque.
Exactly. When the endothelial lining becomes inflamed and sticky, circulating lipids, specifically oxidized LDL cholesterol, begin to literally adhere to the arterial walls.
And then the immune system tries to clean it up.
Right. It dispatches specialized white blood cells called macrophages to clean up these lipid deposits, but it backfires. The macrophages gorge themselves on the oxidized lipids until they literally become bloated and die.
Oh, man.
Yeah, they transform into what we call foam cells, and these foam cells accumulate, they calcify, and they form the physical atherosclerotic plaques that narrow your arteries.
And the truly terrifying part of this research is that they aren't just finding cholesterol in those arterial plaques.
No, they aren't.
When cardiologists perform endarterectomies, when they physically remove the blockages from the arteries of heart attack patients, they routinely find the exact DNA signatures of oral bacteria embedded deep within the plaque itself.
It's wild. The bacteria from a chronic gum infection are literally taking up physical residence in the walls of the arteries near the heart.
Actively accelerating the breakdown of the tissue.
Yeah, they are contributing directly to the instability of the plaque. And plaque rupture is what actually causes the acute cardiac event, the heart attack or the stroke.
Wait, so the bacteria make the plaque more likely to burst?
Yes. The proteases and enzymes released by these oral bacteria weaken the fibrous cap of the plaque, making it much more likely to rupture, form a clot, and completely block blood flow.
Which means you cannot effectively treat cardiovascular risk without aggressively addressing the state of your gums.
You really can't. It's a massive missing piece of cardiology.
That dramatically escalates the stakes of a skipped flossing session, let me tell you.
Seriously.
But the vascular highway doesn't just run to the heart. It pumps that bacteria-laden blood directly up to the brain.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah. This brings us to the neurology component of this deep dive, which is currently one of the most heavily funded areas of longevity research right now.
For good reason.
Let's look at the National Institute of Aging data. They conducted this massive longitudinal study following over 8,000 adults over the age of 65.
A huge sample size.
Huge. And the findings were unambiguous. Individuals presenting with clinical gum disease demonstrated significantly higher accelerated risks of developing dementia and Alzheimer's disease.
And like you said, a sample size of 8,000 patients over a long duration, that completely removes the possibility of mere statistical noise. We are looking at a clear causal pathway here.
But for a long time, neurology kind of operated on the assumption that the brain was completely isolated from systemic infections, right? Because of the blood-brain barrier.
Right. The BBB was thought to be this highly selective, semi-permeable border of endothelial cells designed to absolutely prevent solutes in the circulating blood from crossing into the central nervous system.
But just like the border wall of our gums, the blood-brain barrier is not invincible.
Far from it. The chronic systemic inflammation we just discussed, the constant elevation of C-reactive protein and those circulating cytokines, it slowly degrades the tight junctions of the blood-brain barrier over decades.
So the barrier's integrity just becomes compromised. It becomes leaky.
It becomes very leaky. And once that happens, specific oral pathogens can physically migrate into the brain tissue.
And there's one specific bacterium the research focuses on here, right?
Yes, most notably a bacterium called Porphyromonas gingivalis.
P. gingivalis.
Exactly. It's the primary driver of severe periodontitis. And once it gets inside the brain, P. gingivalis starts releasing these toxic enzymes called gingipains.
Specialized immune system.
Right. The brain relies on these resident immune cells called microglia. When the microglia detect the presence of gingipains and these invading oral bacteria, they activate and initiate a localized inflammatory response.
Neuroinflammation.
Yes, and while acute neuroinflammation is a protective mechanism, chronic neuroinflammation is deeply destructive. The overactive microglia actually begin to damage healthy neurons.
Oh, wow.
And it goes deeper. There is a growing consensus in neurobiology regarding amyloid beta.
That's the protein that clumps together to form the plaques characteristic of Alzheimer's disease.
Right, exactly. The new theory is that amyloid beta may actually function initially as an antimicrobial peptide.
Wait, that is a massive paradigm shift. The conventional view has always been that amyloid plaques are just like toxic metabolic waste that the brain failed to clear out.
I know.
But you're saying the brain might actually be intentionally producing amyloid beta to trap and neutralize these invading oral bacteria.
The data strongly points in that direction. The amyloid beta physically encapsulates the pathogens to protect the surrounding brain tissue.
That is incredible.
But here is the problem. Because the influx of bacteria from the diseased gums is continuous and unrelenting, the brain has to produce amyloid beta at a rate that vastly exceeds its ability to clear it away.
Ah, so the protective mechanism just goes into overdrive.
Right. The plaques accumulate and they eventually choke out the synapses, and that leads directly to the cognitive decline, the memory loss, and the neurological degradation that we eventually diagnose as Alzheimer's.
So the neurodegeneration is effectively the collateral damage of a localized war in the brain. And the invading army is just being continuously supplied by the dysbiosis in your mouth.
It's a brutal cycle.
Okay, so we've mapped how the bacteria travel via the bloodstream to the heart and the brain. But there is a secondary, entirely distinct anatomical pathway we have to address.
The digestive tract.
Right. We swallow our saliva hundreds, if not thousands of times a day. If your mouth is in a state of severe dysbiosis, every single swallow is transporting millions of pathogenic bacteria straight down your esophagus.
Because the digestive tract is a contiguous tube from the mouth straight down to the colon. The oral microbiome is physically seeding the gut microbiome continuously.
But this is where I initially hit a wall when I was looking at the biology. Because shouldn't our stomach acid just kill all the bacteria we swallow?
You would think so.
I mean, the stomach is an incredibly hostile environment. Gastric acid has a resting pH of around, what, 1.5 to 3.5?
Yeah, it is extremely acidic.
It is essentially a vat of hydrochloric acid designed by evolution to denature proteins, break down complex tissues, and explicitly sterilize the food and water we ingest to protect the intestines.
So how are these oral bacteria surviving a literal acid bath?
It is honestly a testament to the brutal efficiency of evolutionary adaptation. You're right that most bacteria, both beneficial and harmful, are indeed destroyed by gastric acid.
Right.
However, research published in Frontiers in Cellular and Infection Microbiology highlights that specific oral pathogens have evolved highly sophisticated countermeasures to survive the stomach transit. And the prime example the literature focuses on is a bacterium called Fusobacterium nucleatum, right?
Yes, Fusobacterium nucleatum.
It kind of acts like a biological Trojan horse. It doesn't just float down on its own.
No, it rarely travels alone. F. nucleatum is exceptional at forming complex, multi-species biofilms. It acts as a structural bridge, literally binding together various other microbes.
So it creates an armor.
Exactly. When a clump of this biofilm is swallowed, the outer layers might be destroyed by the hydrochloric acid, but the bacteria hidden deep within the core of the matrix remain shielded.
That's sneaky.
And it gets crazier. F. nucleatum also possesses localized proton pumps.
Or those do.
They actively eject hydrogen ions. This essentially creates a microscopic, alkaline microenvironment immediately surrounding its cellular membrane. It neutralizes the acid just enough to survive the transit time through the stomach.
Unbelievable. So it survives the acid bath, passes through the pyloric sphincter, and drops straight into your intestines.
Safe and sound.
And once it arrives in the gut, it doesn't just pass through harmlessly, right? It colonizes. It establishes a beachhead.
It definitely integrates into the gut mucosal lining. And it behaves exactly as an invasive species does in any ecosystem. It begins to outcompete your native beneficial gut flora for resources.
And it causes inflammation down there, too.
Huge amounts of it. F. nucleatum is highly inflammatory. It physically binds to the epithelial cells of the intestines and alters their behavior. This impairs the local immune response and degrades the gut barrier function.
Which leads to increased intestinal permeability.
Also known as leaky gut.
Right. The clinical correlations here are incredibly strong. The presence of F. nucleatum in the gut is heavily linked to severe gastrointestinal disorders, most notably inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis, and Crohn's disease.
It's a massive driver of gut pathology.
And for anyone listening who's currently battling chronic, unexplained gut issues, brain fog, systemic fatigue, or diagnosed IBD, the standard protocol is usually to completely overhaul your diet, run food sensitivity panels, and just take massive doses of probiotics.
Which is fine, but
But if we follow this biological pathway, trying to heal the gut while you still have untreated oral dysbiosis is like trying to bail out a sinking boat while ignoring the massive hole in the hull.
that is exactly what it's like.
You are fighting a war in your gut that is being constantly resupplied with hostile reinforcements from your mouth.
You cannot reestablish a healthy gut microbiome if you are perpetually seeding it with acid-resistant oral pathogens. The entire gastrointestinal tract operates downstream of the mouth. If the source water is contaminated, the entire river is polluted.
Wow, okay, that really maps out the multi-front war. We're dealing with localized enamel destruction, systemic vascular inflammation leading to arterial plaque, neuroinflammation driving amyloid beta accumulation, and gastrointestinal colonization leading to IBD.
It is a systemic siege.
It really is. Which brings us to the crucial pivot in this deep dive. Defense. If our bodies are under constant physiological threat from these microbes, how do we reinforce the internal shield?
Right.
The source material compiled by Gary Brecka points to a deeply underestimated foundational tool, vitamin D3. We have to move past the idea that oral care is purely mechanical brushing and realize that the structural integrity of your mouth is dictated by internal biochemistry.
Yeah. We culturally associate calcium with strong teeth and bones, which is accurate, but it's vastly incomplete.
How so?
Because calcium is just the raw building block, but vitamin D3 is the master hormone that dictates whether that building block can actually be utilized. Without adequate serum levels of vitamin D, your intestinal absorption of dietary calcium absolutely plummets.
So you could be eating all the dairy in the world and it wouldn't matter.
You can consume all the calcium-rich foods you want, but your body simply cannot extract and deploy it without D3.
And the structural implications for the mouth are immediate. The International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health published data showing that vitamin D deficiency is overwhelmingly correlated with severe tooth demineralization.
Yes.
It actively drives aggressive cavities, specifically what pediatric dentists call early childhood caries.
Let's examine the cellular mechanism of that demineralization for a second. The enamel of your teeth is the hardest substance in the human body. It's composed primarily of a crystalline lattice of calcium and phosphate.
Okay.
The cells responsible for maintaining this structure, they're called ameloblasts and odontoblasts, are absolutely loaded with vitamin D receptors.
Wait, really? The cells in your teeth have receptors specifically for vitamin D?
Exactly. When vitamin D3 binds to these receptors, it upregulates the synthesis of proteins that are required to pull calcium from the blood and deposit it into the enamel matrix.
So what happens when you are deficient in D3?
This entire remineralization process halts. The enamel loses its density, it becomes structurally porous, developing these microscopic fissures that provide the perfect breeding ground for pathogenic bacteria to colonize and evade mechanical brushing.
Man, your physical armor is essentially just rusting from the inside out.
Yes, it is.
But D3 isn't just a structural form in managing calcium delivery. It is a potent active commander of the local immune system.
Right.
The research shows that vitamin D3 modulates the immune response in the oral cavity by upregulating the production of antimicrobial peptides, specifically cathelicidin and defensins.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, these peptides are just fascinating. They are endogenous, meaning your body produces them naturally, and they function essentially as a biological, highly targeted mouthwash.
A biological mouthwash. How does that work?
Well, cathelicidin and defensins are cationic, meaning they carry a positive electrical charge, and pathogenic bacterial membranes happen to carry a strong negative charge.
Opposites attract.
Exactly. Through simple electrostatic attraction, these peptides bind directly to the bacterial membranes, insert themselves into the lipid bilayer, and physically punch holes in the pathogen.
That is brutal.
It causes the cell to rupture and die.
So vitamin D3 actively increases your body's innate ability to selectively assassinate harmful bacteria before they can establish dysbiosis.
It does.
But it also works on the other end of the spectrum, right, to control the collateral damage. We discussed earlier how chronic inflammation in the gums is what breaks down the barrier and allows the bacteria into the blood.
Right, the leaky gums.
Vitamin D3 directly intervenes in that inflammatory cascade.
It acts as a powerful immunomodulator. In the presence of a bacterial threat, immune cells release signaling molecules called cytokines to trigger inflammation.
Okay.
Two of the primary pro-inflammatory cytokines driving periodontitis are tumor necrosis factor alpha, or TNF-alpha, and interleukin-6, or IL-6. These are the molecules that cause the localized swelling, the vasodilation, and the eventual breakdown of your gum tissue.
And a review published in the Journal of Steroid Biochemistry and Molecular Biology found that robust vitamin D3 supplementation directly downregulates the expression of TNF-alpha and IL-6.
Yes.
It literally dials down the volume on the immune system's fire alarm.
It interrupts the cytokine storm. By suppressing these specific inflammatory markers, vitamin D3 preserves the structural integrity of the junctional epithelium.
So it shuts the door.
It physically stops the bleeding gateway from opening. This keeps the bacteria trapped in the oral cavity where the antimicrobial peptides can neutralize them, rather than allowing them free passage into your systemic circulation.
And the impact of this internal shield isn't just limited to the individual taking the supplement.
Yeah.
There is a profound generational aspect to this biochemistry that highlights how crucial public health messaging around D3 actually is.
The pregnancy data.
Yeah, the clinical data shows that severe vitamin D3 deficiency during pregnancy directly alters the fetal blueprint.
Because the primary developmental window for tooth formation actually occurs in utero. If a pregnant mother is profoundly deficient in vitamin D3, the fetus is deprived of both the calcium and the critical hormonal signaling required to construct that initial enamel matrix.
And the consequences are structural and permanent, right?
Very much so. These children often experience delayed tooth eruption, and when the teeth do come in, the enamel is already compromised, what we call hypoplastic.
So you end up with a child who, despite having perfect brushing habits and a zero-sugar diet, is just trapped in a cycle of constant dental decay.
Exactly. Their primary physical shield was never fully constructed due to a prenatal biological deficit.
It just reinforces the fact that vitamin D3 is not some optional wellness optimization. It's a fundamental prerequisite for human structural development.
It really is the biological foundation upon which all other interventions are built. But once the internal shield is optimized, we must address the external mechanical defense. How do we manipulate the local environment of the mouth to suppress pathogens without simultaneously destroying the commensal microbiome?
Well, this requires a major shift away from modern chemical sterilization. We have to look back at ancient, highly effective biological technologies, specifically the science behind the Ayurvedic practice of oil pulling.
Yes.
For those of you unfamiliar, oil pulling involves taking a small amount of oil and vigorously swishing it through the teeth and around the gums for an extended period, usually in the morning.
Right.
While traditional texts recommend sesame or sunflower oil, Gary Brecka and modern clinical literature heavily advocate for the use of organic, cold-pressed, extra virgin coconut oil.
And the reason isn't flavor?
No.
No, it's driven entirely by the specific lipid profile of the coconut oil. Coconut oil is uniquely composed of roughly 50% lauric acid.
And lauric acid is special why?
Lauric acid is a medium-chain fatty acid that possesses highly potent, well-documented antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. When you introduce lauric acid into the oral cavity and begin the mechanical process of swishing, a fascinating biochemical reaction occurs.
What happens?
The high shear forces of the swishing, combined with the alkaline enzymes naturally present in human saliva, cause the lauric acid to undergo a process called saponification.
Saponification. Wait, that's literally the chemical process of making soap. You are combining a fat with an alkaline solution to create a biological soap directly inside your mouth.
Precisely. The lauric acid is cleaved and converted into a compound called monolaurin. And monolaurin is a highly active lipid membrane disruptor.
Okay, so how does that hurt the bacteria?
Well, many of the most dangerous pathogenic bacteria in the mouth, including Streptococcus mutans, which is the primary driver of dental cavities, are enclosed in a lipid envelope. The monolaurin integrates into that lipid envelope, destabilizes the membrane, and physically breaks the bacteria apart.
It just dissolves their protective armor.
Exactly.
And the clinical outcomes of this specific chemical reaction are super robust. Studies demonstrate that a consistent oil pulling routine significantly reduces colony-forming units of Streptococcus mutans.
It also effectively suppresses Candida albicans, which is the fungal pathogen responsible for oral thrush.
Yeah, and it drastically lowers clinical plaque index scores, accelerates the healing of gingival inflammation, and by eliminating the anaerobic bacteria responsible for volatile sulfur compounds, it fundamentally cures bad breath.
But what is vitally important to understand here is the contrast between the mechanism of monolaurin and the mechanism of modern clinical mouthwashes, such as those containing chlorhexidine.
Chlorhexidine is the heavy-duty stuff you get from the dentist, right?
Right. Chlorhexidine is a broad-spectrum bisbiguanide. It is incredibly effective at rupturing bacterial cell walls, but it exhibits high cellular toxicity. It's not differentiate between a pathogen and a beneficial commensal microbe.
It just kills everything.
Everything. Furthermore, it is toxic to human fibroblasts, which are the cells responsible for repairing your gum tissue.
It's the ultimate scorched earth chemical. Prolonged use of chlorhexidine alters your taste receptors, causes heavy brown staining on the teeth, and completely obliterates the microbiome.
Which, as we established, just invites rapid opportunistic recolonization by worse pathogens the moment you stop using it.
Right. Whereas oil pulling provides the antimicrobial efficacy, reducing the pathogenic load, while completely sparing the beneficial flora and avoiding cellular toxicity to the gums.
It is a targeted biomimetic intervention, but the efficacy of oil pulling relies entirely on strict adherence to the protocol. The mechanical execution is absolutely critical.
So let's lay out that protocol step by step for the listener. Step 1. You take 1 tablespoon of solid, organic, unrefined coconut oil. As soon as it hits the biological heat of your mouth, it liquefies into a viscous fluid.
Right.
Step 2 is the mechanical swishing. You want to pull it aggressively through the interdental spaces, really forcing it around the gum line.
And timing is important here. The traditional Ayurvedic texts call for 10 to 20 minutes of continuous swishing.
20 minutes, that's a long time.
It is. Gary Brecka notes that modern attention spans often make 20 minutes a major hurdle, so he advocates starting with just 1 to 3 minutes if that's too long.
But the longer the better.
Right. The longer you swish, the more the oil emulsifies, drawing in bacteria, cellular debris, and plaque matrix into the lipid suspension. The emulsion acts as a sink for the localized toxins.
Which brings us to the paramount safety warning of this entire practice. Step 3 is non-negotiable.
Very important.
Do absolutely not swallow the oil.
You not swallow it.
If you swallow the emulsified oil, you are taking millions of concentrated, highly active Fusobacterium nucleatum and Streptococcus mutans and delivering them directly into your gastrointestinal tract, entirely bypassing your salivary defenses. You must expel the oil.
And practically speaking, you must expel it into a trash receptacle, not down your sink drain.
Oh yeah, I've heard horror stories about that.
Yeah, when the coconut oil hits the cold plumbing pipes, it will rapidly solidify back into a dense lipid block, encapsulating the bacteria and effectively destroying your plumbing.
So spit it in the trash, immediately rinse your mouth thoroughly with warm water to clear any residual lipid film, and then just proceed with your normal brushing routine.
Implementing this protocol just 3 to 5 times a week profoundly alters the ecological balance of the oral microbiome in favor of the host.
Okay, so we have dissected the pathology of dysbiosis, the systemic pathways to the heart, brain, and gut, the internal biochemistry of vitamin D3, and the topical intervention of oil pulling.
Right.
To make this biology actionable, we must synthesize it into a comprehensive daily toolkit for you. A protocol designed to shut down the inflammatory gateway and aggressively remineralize your structural armor. Let's build the ultimate oral health upgrade protocol.
Let's do it.
Let's start with the mechanical hardware, the toothbrush. The standard consumer instinct is to buy firm bristles, assuming aggressive scrubbing is required to remove plaque. The clinical consensus vehemently disagrees with that, right?
Strongly disagrees. The protocol requires an immediate switch to a soft bristle, preferably a high-quality electric or sonic toothbrush. Firm bristles are highly destructive microabrasives.
They just tear up your gums?
Daily use physically excoriates the delicate junctional epithelium. It induces mechanical recession of the gums and creates microlacerations that grant bacteria direct access to the bloodstream.
Wow.
Furthermore, firm bristles mechanically abrade the enamel layer over time. A sonic toothbrush, utilizing soft bristles, relies on high-frequency fluid dynamics rather than sheer mechanical force.
So it's the vibration, not the scrubbing.
Exactly. The rapid micromovements create microbubbles that disrupt plaque biofilms deep beneath the gum line without traumatizing the tissue.
And crucially, the brush head must be replaced every 3 months. The nylon bristles degrade, and the base just becomes a permanent reservoir for bacterial colonies.
Yes, change your brush head.
Next is the chemical intervention, the toothpaste pivot. The source material emphasizes a complete departure from conventional fluoride-based pastes. The protocol strongly advocates for toothpaste formulated with nanohydroxyapatite.
Right.
Now, fluoride has been the gold standard in public health for decades because it forms fluorapatite, which resists acid. Why the pivot to hydroxyapatite?
Well, fluoride is an exogenous chemical that carries highly debated systemic absorption risks, particularly concerning thyroid function and neurotoxicity when it's chronically ingested.
Okay.
Hydroxyapatite, on the other hand, is completely biomimetic. It is the exact calcium phosphate mineral crystal that comprises 97% of your dental enamel and 70% of your dentin.
Oh, well, so you're just putting back what's already there.
Exactly. When you brush with nanohydroxyapatite, you are not introducing a foreign chemical. You are supplying the precise endogenous building blocks to the tooth. The nanoparticles physically bind to the surface, seamlessly filling in the microscopic demineralized fissures.
So it effectively rebuilds the armor from the outside in with zero risk of systemic toxicity. It is localized biological repair.
Yes.
But to get that hydroxyapatite into the microscopic fissures, we have to correct a massive behavioral error, the order of operations. I, like most people, was taught to brush my teeth to get them clean and then use floss afterward to pick out any stubborn food particles.
Yeah, that's what we were all taught.
But the protocol dictates that this is entirely backward. You must floss first, thoroughly clean the interdental spaces, and then brush.
The physics of brushing dictate this change. Plaque accumulation is heaviest in the interproximal spaces, which are the tight areas between the teeth where the brush bristles cannot physically reach.
Right.
If you brush first, you are merely polishing the accessible surfaces while leaving the most critical areas clogged with dense bacterial biofilm. If you floss first, you mechanically disrupt and remove that interproximal plaque matrix.
You open up the spaces.
You open up the spaces. Then, when you introduce the nanohydroxyapatite toothpaste, the fluid dynamics of the brushing action can force those remineralizing agents deep into the newly exposed, highly vulnerable surfaces between the teeth.
Makes total sense. You cannot paint a wall until you have scraped off the old rotting paint.
Great analogy.
Beyond the hardware and the sequence, the protocol requires managing the fluid environment of your mouth throughout the day. Hydration is not just about systemic blood volume. It is about maintaining optimal salivary flow.
Saliva is your biological buffering agent.
Yeah, it is packed with amylase to break down carbohydrates, lysozymes to attack bacterial cell walls, and a high concentration of dissolved calcium and phosphate ions just waiting to be deposited back into the enamel.
But if you are chronically dehydrated or if you breathe primarily through your mouth, you desiccate the oral cavity.
You dry it out.
Yes. A dry mouth loses its buffering capacity. The pH plummets into an acidic state, remineralization ceases entirely, and the pathogenic bacteria proliferate exponentially. You absolutely must maintain hydration to keep the salivary flow robust.
Concurrently, you must eliminate the constant influx of refined sugars that feed the anaerobic bacteria and aggressively limit your exposure to exogenous acids.
And if you are going to consume acidic beverages, whether it's black coffee, kombucha, or even just a healthy daily lemon water, the protocol provides a simple mechanical bypass.
Use a straw.
Use a straw. By placing the straw past the teeth, you drastically minimize the contact time between the highly corrosive acid and the delicate hydroxyapatite crystal structure of your enamel.
It is a simple behavioral modification that prevents decades of cumulative chemical erosion.
Absolutely.
Now, we cannot just constantly clean and scrub the ecosystem. We have to actively cultivate it. We have to reforest the rainforest.
Yes.
The protocol mandates seeding the oral microbiome by incorporating high-quality, unpasteurized fermented foods into your daily diet.
Foods like milk kefir, raw organic sauerkraut, and traditional kimchi are dense with potent live probiotic strains.
And the physical act of chewing and swallowing these foods actively populates the oral cavity and the downstream digestive tract with beneficial bacteria.
It increases microbial diversity and creates an environment where pathogens are aggressively outcompeted for resources. You are structurally reinforcing the beneficial flora.
Okay, so what does this all mean? All of these topical and dietary interventions rely on the final, most critical component of the protocol, the supplement synergy. We established that vitamin D3 is the master hormone for calcium absorption and immune regulation. But biology does not operate in isolation.
Never.
This is where Gary Brecka's clinical synthesis is vital. The protocol dictates an absolute rule. If you are supplementing with vitamin D3, or even if you are optimizing natural synthesis through getting 15 to 30 minutes of daily sun exposure, you must simultaneously supplement with vitamin K2.
Because the biochemical interaction between D3 and K2 is a masterclass in physiological regulation.
How do they work together?
When vitamin D3 elevates your serum calcium levels by pulling it from your intestines, its job is essentially finished. D3 floods the bloodstream with calcium, but it lacks the cellular intelligence to direct that calcium to the appropriate tissues.
It was just floating around.
Right. And without a regulatory mechanism, that free-floating calcium is highly prone to precipitating out of the blood and depositing into soft tissues.
Which brings us right back to cardiovascular disease. Unregulated calcium will literally calcify the endothelial lining of your arteries, turning flexible blood vessels into rigid pipes and directly contributing to the hardening of the atherosclerotic plaques we discussed earlier.
Exactly. It can also form calcifications in the kidneys and the joints. Taking high doses of vitamin D3 without K2 is frankly biologically reckless.
So what does K2 do?
Vitamin K2, specifically the MK7-menachinone form, acts as the biological director. K2 is responsible for the carboxylation, which just means the chemical activation of two specific crucial proteins, matrix glyprotein, or MGP, and osteocalcin. When K2 activates MGP, it physically sweeps the arteries, binding to rogue calcium and preventing vascular calcification.
And osteocalcin.
Simultaneously, the activated osteocalcin acts like a biological magnet within the bone and tooth matrix, grabbing the circulating calcium out of the blood and permanently locking it into the hydroxyapatite structure of your teeth and skeleton.
I always visualize vitamin D3 as the massive supply truck that delivers a huge load of bricks to the construction site, but just dumps them in the middle of the highway, blocking traffic.
Yeah.
Vitamin K2 is the GPS routing system and the site foreman combined. It clears the bricks off the highway, the arteries, and directs the workers to build the actual structural wall in the teeth. They are a mandatory pairing. You cannot safely utilize one without the other.
Exactly. And the biological complexity demands one final cofactor to complete the triad. The protocol necessitates the inclusion of a highly bioavailable form of magnesium.
Why magnesium? What role does it play in this specific calcium routing pathway?
Magnesium is the biochemical spark plug that powers the entire system. When you ingest vitamin D3, it enters the body in an inactive storage form. It must be transported to the liver and then to the kidneys, where specific enzymes convert it into its biologically active hormonal form, calcitriol.
Okay, and it needs energy for that.
Yes. Every single enzymatic step in that conversion process requires ATP cellular energy. And ATP cannot function unless it is physically bound to a magnesium ion.
Wow. So if you are magnesium deficient, which clinical data suggests up to 70% of the modern population is due to depleted soil quality and processed diets, your body physically lacks the enzymatic spark required to activate the vitamin D3 you are taking.
You can swallow massive doses of D3, but it remains locked in its inert storage form, completely useless to your immune system and your dental remineralization process.
The biological cascade just fails at step 1.
You are entirely correct. You need magnesium to activate the vitamin D3. You need the activated D3 to absorb the dietary calcium. And you definitively need vitamin K2 to safely route that calcium out of your vascular system and drive it deep into the enamel of your teeth.
It is a non-negotiable biochemical triad.
It really is.
When you lay it out like that, the sheer complexity and interconnectivity of human biology are awe-inspiring. We really cannot view our health through a reductionist lens.
No, we have to look at the whole picture.
As we pull all of these threads together and bring this deep dive to a close, the massive biological journey we've mapped out today fundamentally changes the paradigm. The overarching takeaway is irrefutable. Your mouth is a highly volatile, remarkably complex 700-species microbial ecosystem.
Right.
It is the literal front door to your systemic health. By protecting its balance, you aren't just saving your teeth. When you adopt this protocol, when you aggressively manage dysbiosis, when you protect the permeability of the gingival barrier, when you harness the antimicrobial chemistry of oil pulling, and when you optimize the D3, K2, and magnesium triad, you are doing so much more than preserving your smile.
You are actively engaging in the highest level of preventative internal medicine. You are shielding your vascular endothelium from the inflammation that drives heart attacks.
Yeah.
You are protecting your gut mucosal barrier from the invasive pathogens that cause inflammatory bowel disease. And you are actively defending the delicate architecture of your brain against the microglial activation that leads to neurodegenerative decline.
It completely elevates the mundane act of brushing your teeth into a profound daily intervention for total longevity.
It does. And synthesizing all of this data, well, this raises an important question regarding our modern approach to health.
What's that?
If our longevity, our cognitive function, and our cardiovascular integrity absolutely rely on maintaining a delicate symbiotic balance with hundreds of species of bacteria. How much has our modern, culturally ingrained obsession with total biological sterilization actually harmed us?
That is a great point.
We live in a society that is terrified of the microbial world. We bathe in harsh antimicrobial soaks, we scorch our mouths with alcohol, we prescribe broad-spectrum antibiotics for minor viral infections, and we hypersanitize our food supply.
We're constantly trying to enact a scorched earth policy against our own biology.
Yes, and the clinical reality suggests that this relentless pursuit of a sterile existence, the desire to kill 99.9% of everything, has not protected us. It has systematically dismantled our internal ecological shields, paving the way for the massive rise in the exact chronic systemic diseases we are so desperately trying to avoid.
Wow.
We have to fundamentally abandon the mindset of eradication and embrace the science of biological cultivation.
We have to stop salting the earth and start tending to the garden. That is a brilliant, provocative framework to leave everyone with. It forces you to rethink every chemical you interact with on a daily basis. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this massive exploration of the biological front lines. I guarantee you are going to look at your bathroom sink, your toothbrush routine, and just your whole morning with an entirely new level of respect tomorrow.
Yeah, you really will.
Don't just mindlessly brush. Cultivate the ecosystem. Protect your internal shield. Keep those microbes in check, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.